Hey everyone, some of you may know that I'm a huge fan of the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. I mean, I love The Lord of the Rings. Maybe a little too much, but that's okay because as a board gamer, there's a plethora of options at my disposal should I want to get my Middle-earth on. And while there are many great games set in Middle-earth, it's War of the Ring and its smaller but still awesome sequel, Battle of Five Armies, that reign supreme as the ones that have the most reverence for the written work of Tolkien. But these games are war games. Not everyone wants to play them, and also certainly not everyone has the time to play these. There is a lot of game to unpack here. So when I heard that the same people who brought you these games were teaming up with the Letters from Whitechapel guy in order to make a hidden movement prequel to War of the Ring, I knew I was intrigued and I had to check it out. And it's here. And I'm here to tell you that this is a completely different type of game, yet at the same time has the same depth of strategy, the same reverence for the written work, and absolutely deserves to be in the War of the Ring line. I have so many thoughts on this game, but that's what we're here for. So today on the Cardboard Herald, we're taking a look at Hunt for the Ring by Ares Games. Like a mini campaign, there are two distinct halves to Hunt for the Ring that can be played back-to-back or saved between sessions. Both games have the same basic flow, played on different sides of the board, with the Fellowship player trying to secretly move the ring bearer from their start to end location, recording their movement using a journey log, hopefully covering up evidence of their quest and complete some deeds along the way. The Shadow player controls 4 Nazgul, the ring race hunting for the ring, moving them along the board trying to hunt for the ring bearer, corrupting him to the point where the quest fails and the Shadow immediately wins. During both games, the Fellowship player is trying to get the ring bearer from one end of the board to the other, hopefully ignoring as much Nazgul encounters as possible, because the more they find you, the more corruption they will hand you, and if you get enough corruption, then you will lose the game. Now, this is going to be different from one game to another, because the first half of the game, you are going to play as Frodo. You are controlling the ring bearer, evading the Nazgul, and hopefully finding some of these information tokens along the game. At the beginning of the game, you'll draw them and they correspond to different locations. You move there first and you flip them over, showing that you've been there. But if the Nazgul stumble upon those locations before you made it, then they acquire it, which makes them more powerful during this game and the next. Speaking of the next game, during the second half of the game, you control Gandalf, and this is what's really cool here, is that the ring bearer is now controlled by a journey card that you selected at the beginning, which will move him along corresponding to the turn, just as if you were controlling him, but on a set path. If he gets found while on a journey card, then you get to draw a new one here. And Gandalf's job is to move along the board, still hidden, but he's going to interfere with the abilities of the ring race, and he's also going to try and acquire these Gandalf deed tokens, increasing your maximum corruption. Furthermore, if you really need it at great cost to the Fellowship, you can have him pop up on the board, springing all Nazgul back and saying, "None shall pass!" And this is a really important decision for you to make because it reveals a lot of information, and you have to sacrifice one of your resource tokens that you can get, like, permanently. It's out of the game. But not only does it feel like it is really powerful when it happens, it feels awesome thematically. I love that. Now, aside from that, there's some cards that help out the Fellowship. You have these companion cards that are with you. They're your traveling companions, and they give you a bunch of different abilities, but if you get corruption, you can always choose to sacrifice one in order to stave off some of that corruption, which really hurts as the Fellowship player. You're permanently losing out on something, but it's a critical decision that you may end up having to make before the end of the 2 games. The other thing is that there are these ally cards, one for game 1, one for game 2, that have a wide range of abilities in order to aid or interfere, and most often putting ally tokens on the board that can be impassable terrain for Nazgul moving in, unless they choose to use one of their action dice in order to slay them. Speaking of which, so you want to be a Shadow player, huh? Well, I don't blame you. Not only does it feel really cool moving all these little Nazgulis about the board, but you feel really empowered, like there's a lot of options at your disposal in order to search for the hidden movers in this hidden movement game. So first off, not only do all of them get to move and act every single turn, but you can always take the basic action of pointing at a location and say, has the ring bearer ever been here? And then you have these action dice, which are rolled at the beginning of a round, that give you various abilities based off of the face of the dice. There's things like drawing and playing shadow cards, or you can kill allies on the board, you can move extra spaces, or you can even do a perception where you point at a Nazgul's larger section of the board and you say, is the ring bearer there presently? And even if you get a no answer, then you have a huge amount of information. You can even narrow down that to a little subsection of the board. Now, Gandalf does interfere with this in Game 2 in that they can tell you that something is there. You don't know if it's Gandalf or the ring bearer, but that's part of the fun. And speaking of Game 2, the Shadow player is a little bit more consistent from Game 1 to Game 2. They're pretty much doing the same thing, except for in Game 1, you're trying to find those information tokens getting a little bit more powerful every time. And then in Game 2, you have the ability to switch out one of your ring wraiths with the Witch King of Angmar, who is awesome. Now, this doesn't always happen, and it may happen a few times because he goes away after a successful hunt, but this guy gives you an awesome gold die that's more abilities, and they are more powerful versions of the abilities that you had in the previous game. It feels cool how the Nazgul, the Shadow player in general, just gets more powerful as the Fellowship withers throughout the two games. Certain things will carry over from the first game to the second. There's the corruption level of the Fellowship, the amount of information tokens gathered, cards in hand, and even the character cards that manage to survive into the second game. All will inform your position at the beginning of the second game. Now, you can play it as one epic game, which I love because The Lord of the Rings is epic, but for my current lifestyle, I appreciate that Gandalf's letter here, which is effectively just a bag that you shove components in order to keep track of where you left off, is a very functional and thematic way in order to carry on one game to the next. Makes it a much more manageable, about hour-and-a-half session in order to play through one half of the game. Now, what I like about this game is that both sides feel mutually empowered to achieve their objective. They feel like they have options at their disposal, and there are really agonizing decisions about when to use dice, when to flip over characters in order to get rid of corruption, when to have Gandalf appear on the board. Those are all really important strategic decisions that you get to make. And I love that because so many hidden movement games don't have a lot of meat on the bones, but this one does, while at the same time, at its core, being a really effective cat and mouse game. Let's talk about thematic resonance. This game is so incredibly thematic, and that's not just because of the artwork in the game, which is beautiful and done by one of the most premier, world-renowned Tolkien artists out there, John Howe, but this also is just incredibly immersive in the mechanisms of the game. Every single thing that you do has some sort of source in the theme itself, and that to me is one of the things that I love most about it. Like, first off, not only when you're searching for the ring as the Nazgul do you feel the presence of it, because the nine, the ring race, they are connected to the one ring, so of course they'd be able to feel it out. But then other things like Strider, he allows you to have extra journey cards because he led the ring bearers from Bree over to Rivendell. And it's not just limited to the direct actions that you're taking. The abstract concepts like the cards that you play in order to generate allies, they make a lot of thematic sense. I mean, Fatty Bolger is hanging out here in Crick Hollow while, I don't know, Tom Bombadil and his Bay Goldberry, yeah, you know they're hanging about in the Old Forest. That's where those tokens are going to end up getting placed on the cards that correspond to them. The amount of love and care that was put into crafting this game is outstanding. So if you're a hidden movement fan, fan, this has all the tension that you're looking for. If you're a fantasy fan, then this is a gripping adventure that you can appreciate, and it'll come natural to you even if you don't know all the details of the written or movie adaptations. Now, if you are a Lord of the Rings fan or Tolkien in general, this game packs so many treasures in it that it is practically the Smaug's hoard of thematic resonance. This is an incredible presentation of Tolkien's work and very much deserving to be in the War of the... Okay, so by now it should be abundantly clear that I love Hunt for the Ring. This game does so much mechanically and thematically that I just really dig. But there are a few things that I should mention if you're considering picking up this game. First off, this game is marketed as a 2 to 5 player game, and while it is technically true that you could split up the Nazgul and play with more than 2 players, I think this is part of a long tradition started by War of the Ring in lying about player count. This is absolutely a 2-player game that is a head-to-head duel of wits between you and the Fellowship, or in the case of the Fellowship, you against the Shadow. And while I appreciate the option is there, it still feels like you're just diluting the options available to each Shadow player when you split it up. Not only do you share the same pool of action dice, but also you still only have a sum total of 4 Nazgul to move across the board, meaning that you're only playing half or even a quarter as much. Not to mention the amount of time that's going to be spent arguing over who gets to use what dice when and who's going to go in and look for the ring bearer or where they could possibly be. The second thing that's worth mentioning is that these busts are really cool looking and add a sophistication, kind of a classic look to this game that it deserves. But while I get that they have to differentiate these ring wraiths somehow, they could have used inlays, darker colors, rings around the bases. Anything would look better than this. And the third thing worth mentioning is that there are a couple cards in the Fellowship deck that allow them to spend their tokens to cancel the effects of Ringwraith actions, one of which even cancels a sorcery card. If you aren't expecting this, this can be a huge bummer because each action is so critical, and if that's one of your cards that can bring the Lord of Nazgul into play, brutal. Fortunately, now you know it's in there, and you can save your best actions for when the Fellowship is out of their nasty green tokens. In summary, Hunt for the Ring is a really dynamic hidden movement game with a great arc spanning across 2 separate sessions. Both halves feel cool and present new challenges, with the Fellowship feeling more powerful during the first half and the second growing stronger throughout. My biggest surprise was how well the Clockwork Frodo worked during Game 2, using Gandalf to aid your poor ring bearers and interfere with the Nazgul as they closed in. Bottom line, both sides feel balanced, interesting, and fun. Alright everyone, so that is our review of Hunt for the Ring, a game that clearly I love thematically, mechanically, Tolkien-astically. I love this thing. It does so many original things in the hidden movement genre, really empowering both sides to kind of gamify and add some meat onto the bones in a way that I haven't seen in other hidden movement games. Also, while I think this game is best if you're a Tolkien fan, whether that be a fan of the Lord of the Rings movies themselves, or you've been diving through the Silmarillion with reckless abandon since you were a teenager, I think that this is still enjoyable if you are just someone who likes or is okay with fantasy. It may bear out to be my favorite hidden movement game of all time. For now, it is absolutely one of my favorite games that I played this year. It is original, unorthodox, and ultimately fun. So the Cardboard Herald recommends the ultimately best at 2-player Hunt for the Ring by Ares Games.